all of you coming in will be timely to be grateful and conscious of everyone that's joining us on at the top of the hour. So today our webinar is called Best Advice I Ever Got, and as I just mentioned, Andrea and Al are two of my favorite people, really good friends. I've worked with them in different capacities, and I feel like the number of conversations I've had with both of them where I was like, please help me, this is going on, or I need some advice, has just been too many to count. And so it was very fitting when Al and I decided to do this as a theme last year and get advice from our friends on, what to do in 2024, especially if you're in HR in a leadership position. They just seemed like the two best people to have this conversation with. So we'll kick off first with quick introductions, and then we'll get on to our topic. And I guess I'll go since I've been babbling already. My name is Sonia Lucina. I am the president at QuestionPro Workforce. I am an organizational psychologist. I'm a huge enthusiast to help people feel fulfilled and happy at their jobs while also feeling productive and feeling like they're making a difference. And so in different ways, shapes, and forms, I've dedicated my career to that. Today, if any of you are in North America or in anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere, please forgive my shirt. I actually currently live in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So we are in summer. When you all are in summer, we're in winter. It's not hot year round. It's just flipped. But if any of you wonder, like, what's going on with her? Like, all of the US is really cold. I currently live in the Southern Hemisphere. So really lovely to have all of you here. And Andrea, if you don't mind, please
Yeah,
introduce
sure.
yourself.
Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, almost Friday. Thank you so much, Sonia, for having me as a part of this discussion today. I think it's really relevant, and advice is always a good thing. I'm Andrea O'Leary. I lead talent development, learning and development, and DEIB at ModMed, which is a privately held software technology company based out of Florida. As Sonia mentioned, her and I go way, way back. We are both actually IO psychologists, so we went to grad school together, which is where we first met each other, and have had the opportunity to work together in a variety of different things throughout our time. I would say I'm passionate about all sorts of things, a lot of which is around that DEIB space where we think about inclusion and belonging, and also just the opportunity to think about the impact we can have at organizations and the work that we do. So again, thanks so much for having me here, and maybe Al, over to you.
All right, Andrea, thank you. Sanya, thank you for having me. I echo what you shared. I mean, you being one of my favorite humans on the planet. And so by the transitive property, Andrea, you are as well. So, thank you for having me. And just a little bit about me, I founded My Future of Work, which is really helping students, early career professionals, and those in career transition understand the future of work and the ways in which they can navigate their own personal educational experience to prepare themselves for what lies ahead. So thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I love it. So we'll get started real quick before we get into that meat of our webinar. I'm just going to tell you who QuestionPro is as a host of this conversation, because I have gotten feedback and advice from my network that a lot of times are like, Sonia, I love your passion. It's great. Everything you talk about, like, what do you do? Like, what's your day job? What does QuestionPro do? So I'm trying to fix that based on people's advice. So real quick, QuestionPro is a global organization. We were founded in 2005, so almost 2 decades ago. It's wild to think how quickly time passes. I was actually in a client meeting today, and this is the first time this occurred to me. I said, I've been a part of QuestionPro for, 15 years. First as a client at Career Builder, and now actually as an employee. So I have had a really long-standing affiliation with the organization. And QuestionPro, what we do is we are set up in a few different verticals. We do research. So for any organizations that are doing product research, universities who are doing research, some of the largest brands and universities are clients. And then we do customer experience surveys, and we do employee experience surveys. And when it comes to employee experience, we do everything from life cycle surveys, onboarding, offboarding, well-being, engagement, like every digital conversation you could imagine wanting to have with your employees. That's what we support. And then we do action planning and also 300 degree feedback for leaders and aspiring leaders. So That's all I'll say for now. If you're interested in learning more, definitely let me know. But just wanted to set the stage if you're not familiar for who we are or why we're having this, webinar and advice for HR. Now you know. So Al and I started this project. In one of our many catch-ups in December, we talked about like, just, 2024 and what are we excited about and what are we nervous about and how are we looking at the year ahead? And at the time, a lot of predictions started to come out. And I thought, you know, predictions are interesting, but many times, like, it's stuff that I don't want to happen. Like, there are things that, our people are predicting or anticipating that maybe we're not that excited about. And so he and I wanted to take a little bit different angle and different approach to the content that we wanted to bring forth as far as really sharing knowledge with our network. And so we sent out one single question to a bunch of people who we know that said, what do you hope or would advise organizations to do in 2024 to prepare their workforce for ongoing disruptions from AI, automations, changes in the labor market demands, etc. And the response was really overwhelming. We loved hearing from people who are friends, people who are in network, people who think about this all the time, both from an HR standpoint and, or maybe as team leaders. And we decided to highlight a few quotes that we felt like were really representative of the different themes that people were bringing up. And what you see on the screen in front of you are some of those themes. And maybe some are a little surprising, probably a lot are not. And it really what positively encouraged me is that, of course, in the sense of advice, everything was positive, and that's, I think, the eternal optimist that Al and I can be was probably not too much surprise there. But also it gave us a little bit of pause to think about what is important to invest in and where do we provide some urgency. So all of these different themes you'll see appearing through the different comments. So I'll kick us off first. I actually wasn't even planning on doing a quote until I spoke with Andrea and Al while we were prepping this webinar. And they said, well, wait, as a host, you should be doing, you should provide a piece of advice yourself. So here we are. And I'll tell you what my advice is, and then I'll turn it on over to Al and Andrea to share some of our colleagues and their own. So for me, I think there's obviously a lot going on, and there's a lot that makes me excited about the year ahead. And of course, there are things that make me nervous, right? We're all human. We know that there are unknowns. We know that there's some maybe scary knowns even coming up. To me, one thing that's really helped me keep it together over the years are relationships that I have with others. And as if you caught the beginning of our conversation, Andrea and I got our PhDs together. We worked on the same team as Career Builder, and that was many years ago. And her and I have kept in touch. We created this really strong bond while we worked together. And now she's one of the first people I go to for work advice, for life advice, if I need somebody brilliant on a webinar. So it really spans different areas. And I was a few years ahead of her in our PhD, not to give away my age, but I really got to know her much more while we were working together. And that's something that's followed me throughout my career. At one point in my career, I started, studying organizational network analysis and how people communicate. And so that's my advice for you looking into next year. You'll see a lot of, different pieces, some more technical, some more AI based. But for me, I am a firm believer that if we can nurture those relationships, and especially if you think about remote work, I mentioned I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The vast majority of my team is all over the world. And a lot of these individuals I've never met before, but knowing them, really truly knowing them, feeling like I have a relationship with them, knowing what they're passionate about in their work, knowing what they're not passionate about in their work, knowing about their families really keeps that connection much stronger and much deeper. And in the moments when I feel like we need each other the most, whether it's a big deadline that I'm thinking, oh, I don't know how I'm going to meet this, I know that I can reach out to my team because I know they'll have my back. And not only because they have to, because they're on my team, because they truly want to, because we've created that kind of bond. And so I would say again that that would be my advice if you're thinking about, the year ahead. if you're doing, which I hope you are, doing employee surveys to ask your employees, hey, how are you doing? How do you feel like your connections are with your colleagues? Do you feel comfortable with them? Do you feel like you can get help when you need to? Do you feel like you have close relationships and share interests at work? I think that's very telling because in times, especially that there's a lot of change, there's a lot of turbulence. We don't want to rely on HR alone. We don't want to always rely on managers alone. We want to make sure that our organizations have this kind of infrastructure in place where people can really support each other. And that foundation is going to allow leadership, HR, et cetera, to invest even more in projects and different things that you want to work on if you don't feel like you have to do everything yourself. So, with that, I will turn it over to Al to share some of David's insights. Of course, I could go on forever because this is something I'm so
Well,
passionate about.
yeah,
If any of you want to have a side conversation about it, let me know.
well, thank you for sharing because, Sanya, you may not have heard recently the U.S. Surgeon General called loneliness an epidemic in the United States. And the fact that we do, as human beings, need one another, not only to be productive at work, but to survive. And that's not hyperbole. It's just, we need each other. And so to have an organization realize that and in effect take advantage of the opportunity and facilitate connection at work, the benefits are beyond the workplace. They're humanistic, and they enter into people's lives and they build trusts. So thank you for sharing. uh, David is a longtime friend and colleague, and obviously he talks about engagement and generative AI and what is going to happen not only with HR but with the organizations, how it's going to impact the human experience. So I'm going to take off what he shares here and put my own narrative around it real quick, because I I have this struggle. We're here and we hear AI is going to have this great benefit to organizations in terms of productivity. Many leaders have already assumed that AI is going to deliver efficiencies that are going to require less human beings in the workplace, and they've made reductions in workforce as a result. They're effectively placing a bet. And I don't think that is a good bet to have. I would hope that HR and leaders in general learn how AI is going to be incorporated into nature of work. And if that creates more capacity and elasticity within the workforce, that's a great thing. And the cost benefits can be realized downstream after it's understood how AI is impacting the human experience at work. So in other words, I don't want HR or anyone in 2024 in particular, was still early days with AI, to jump the gun, so to speak, and get too far ahead of themselves and compromise and stress the people who are left in the organization being overloaded with work, because I already see that happening. So anyway, thank you for sharing. Andrea, anything to share with that?
Well, what I'd say in a little as a segue to the next slide, which is some of the advice that I'm going to be sharing from another colleague, which is around this idea of like upskilling and reskilling, because I think what you talk about, Al, is a very common sort of thought or fear, I think, from a lot of people, which is this idea that as AI is becoming more of a boomer, a big thing, that it is intended to replace people, when I think really the reality is, and how do we shift the narrative in HR and really across businesses in general to make it much more about finding more space and capacity to allow our talent to do the more meaningful things, the things that AI won't be able to do, the things that are going to create more strategy, create more business growth, et cetera. And so a lot of what Guadalupe talks about here is this idea of upskilling and reskilling the workforce, and how critical it's going to be to make sure to really understand the impacts of what that will look like to train people. And I love this advice as well, coming from, as I mentioned, a bit of like the DEIB background. What this talks about is how do we continue to leverage and utilize our talent in such a way that's really meaningful. And I think one of the things that AI does is give space and capacity for us to do that. And so what that means is we've got to really think about what are the most important skills that organizations need, or your organization needs, what's really going to take you to where you want to be in 5 years, and really think about how do we start to upskill or reskill our staff now, as we know that AI is becoming more and more prevalent, and we are going to find ways to gain efficiency and productivity across the workforce from an AI standpoint. And so I think making sure that there's opportunity there to really focus on what's important for your organization, providing different ways for them to get skilled, to learn, and making sure that they're understanding really the value AI can bring from that standpoint as well. So, Sonia, back over to you.
Well, I love, and I like, I need to say something too, because this is an area, of course, I'm so passionate about, and part of it is because I'm not comfortable with it. As somebody who's worked on technology development her whole career, AI is still something that makes me really nervous. But why? So my mindset is it makes me nervous because I don't know it today. And a lot of the times, like in my line of work, I'm thinking about how can I get efficiencies using AI? Because Al, you and I have talked about capacity probably every time we've had a conversation. And it's tough. It's tough finding the number of hours in the day that you want to get everything done. And I think that applies to work as well. And one of the things, like I write a lot, I do a lot of research, and Guille, who's our head of marketing behind the scenes on here, will probably laugh at me saying this, but anytime a team uses it to write, I'm like, that doesn't sound like you. It doesn't sound like me. Like I need to do this authentically. And I do still, but here's the thing, is our marketing director too, Crystal told me, she's like, oh, but if you do something enough times, it learns your voice better. It does sound more authentic. And I'm like, oh. So my point being is that one thing I'm trying to challenge myself, and I'm putting out myself out there, like kind of with all the vulnerability in the world, because I'm saying I'm not getting it yet, and I'm publicly saying I need to be better, is that we're still a bit at the forefront of it. And so experimenting now is important because if any of the expectations are correct, which I think they will be, this will go really quickly. So if we don't put ourselves out there and feel this discomfort and grow and learn with it, it's going to be much harder later. And so to me, that's why I think I don't have the data for it, and I don't want to make a gross generalization, but educate a guess that maybe people in HR are not quite as comfortable like people in engineering and people in tech because we have different backgrounds. And so I think to David's point, and then, segmenting to Lupe's, for HR, it's even more important for us to step into it because of that discomfort and start to learn from the beginning versus playing catch up later. Because then I think it will be even more exponentially difficult. Like imagine when the internet came about, the World Wide Web. It's like, oh no, I'm still going to use the encyclopedia and I'll still use this. And suddenly it took off. Imagine looking up something in the encyclopedia now. I'm sure people still occasionally do, probably the vast majority go to this. So to me, that's just one point, is that I think if you're listening to us and if you're uncomfortable, I'll tell you I'm uncomfortable with you, but it's it's one of those, necessary things looking ahead. So that was my 2 cents just putting out there. If anyone has any tips, I keep asking. I keep I keep asking everybody for advice. Like tell me anything that's worked for you to learn different tricks and tips in AI. And actually Lupus sent me something in our earlier conversation. So that was very, very fitting segue. So I'll jump on to the next one. And I adore Serena, and her advice always like really is aligned with what I believe in. And so I chose to to also highlight this one. A big reason for that. Interestingly enough, I was catching up with David Green yesterday, and we were talking about like next year and what are you excited about and what are some of your, plans. And I said, one thing that's really been bothering me and that I've had a hard time with is that I'm such a big advocate of well-being, and I'm such a big advocate of, the physical, mental, everything Serena talks about. And I'm so worried that the trends that I'm seeing, what people are saying, what people are writing about, is that we're going to start to go back of that being in the shadows, and that it's still going to be, a little bit more about the hustle culture and really, making sacrifices to succeed. And I just want people to find a way to balance all of it. And I'm not necessarily saying having it all, because I do know sometimes, I mean, first of all, how do you define all? How do you manage all? But that I don't want to go back to 20, 30 plus years ago where one of the only ways to be successful was to sacrifice your well-being and was to sacrifice your family. And that in many ways was kind of the norm, right? And so what Serena says really resonates with me. And I love that she says that it's every single CEO, because that's where a lot of my fear is. Some of my fear is that maybe in HR and some of the talent teams, like, will get the importance, but you don't want to, seem naive in front of your CEO that's, of course, trying to drive numbers and looking for the financial well-being of the business. So I think this is really, a big way to use data to show success cases in different organizations, organizations that have done financially well and still very much outwardly talk about well-being and the importance of that. And I do, you know, echo what she's saying with Gen Z and millennials. So yesterday was also yesterday I had a big catch up day this week. I went through all of my friends and I was like, we have to talk. It's the start of the year. So I was talking with Aoife O'Brien, and we were saying who are the individuals that invest in this, as a men, as a women. And I said, again, no data or no research in front of me, but sometimes I wonder, it's more difficult to challenge someone that's had to make big sacrifices to pave their way, right? And for a lot of individuals who are in those roles, maybe they've had to do that and they've had to sacrifice their families. And I know it can be more difficult to say, okay, but the next generation doesn't have to. And so I do think, and I hope that as we go into millennials being in more management positions and Gen Zs eventually, um, that because their upbringing was maybe different, they're going to approach leadership and management differently from the get-go. So that's my advice is really to don't treat it as something that'll go away. Don't treat it as something that, you know, um, clashes with financial impact, that clashes with productivity. I think the more and more we can show that connection with the data, the more successful we're going to be to get everybody's buy-in inside the organization. Because I think the only reason today that it doesn't necessarily happen is that there are still some people that are seeing it kind of as this binary things. Like, you can either have well-being or productivity, but how could you possibly have both? And you can. I believe you can. And I will continue to find every data point under the sun to prove that, whether it's through our research or other research. But so anyways, Andrea, what are your thoughts on this one?
I'll just chime in real quick. I believe, and the way I term it is, I grew up as a 56-year-old man in what I call the suck it up generation. It's just, there's your job, just do what you're told. That's the way it is. And to your point, younger, high value talent, they have options, and they won't put up with what I and my peers and my age cohort put up with. And so as we evolve, I think, and I'm saddened by the fact that many organizations in North America and Europe have shrunk their well-being initiatives and the associated budget. And there's going to be a cost to that in lost trust, in lost productivity, voluntary turnover increase, on down the line. So understanding how to optimize those investments. I mean, I have no illusion that you can just spend endlessly on well-being, to your point. At the same time, to visibly step back from prioritizing the well-being of employees, I think is a gross, not only mistake, but it's an irresponsible step among leaders. And hopefully that shifts, quickly, because it's the need for well-being is never going to go away.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, because I agree with, everything that's been said, is I just think the importance of the call out of this idea of financial, mental, physical, this idea of a whole self well-being and what that really means and what we think about. I mean, we globally spend so much time at work, and this idea of showing up differently or showing up in such a way at work than you need to show up at home is very exhausting for a lot of people, and that takes its toll over time. And burnout is a real thing, especially in a place where we were coming off of a pandemic where people were working a lot of times around the clock because nobody was going anywhere and leaving the house, et cetera. And so I think we're still trying to figure out exactly where that balance is. And I think, Al, to your point, we oftentimes see the ebb and flow of where investment is, given whether it's more of a job searcher's market or an employer's market. And we know right now we're in a bit more of an employer's market. And so there's a little bit more liberty on where they can cut. But I wholeheartedly agree with you that well-being is something that if organizations are choosing to cut too much there, it will be something down the line that can come back and kind of be a sticking point for quite a few people in attracting talent.
Thank you for that. All right. So next, this was funny. We had an Andrea too that Al's gonna grab. Rarely do we get people with the same names in the group, but here we are with an Andrea and an Andrea. So Al, do you want to share this one?
Um, yeah, I'm trying to, let me put it this way. Uh, I was trying to be creative, but I'm going to emphasize a point instead, is capacity. So at an individual level, AI holds a lot of promise. I did a presentation recently. It would have taken me, I'm going to make it up, a full day to have found the appropriate research, read the research, and package a slide that communicated the highlights thereof. It took me 30 seconds because I leveraged AI, and that was a huge benefit for me. So being really mindful of how to leverage AI at the individual level and in turn the team and organizational level, I think is a massive opportunity. I just, as I shared before, and that's the reason I hesitated at the outset, yeah, if there's an assumption that efficiencies are going to be gained throughout a particular job family in an organization, and you're going to reduce that workforce by 10%, for example, I think that's grossly irresponsible. And I believe that's what Andrea is getting at in this piece of advice here. So anyway, I can go on. It's just a dangerous road. I feel the sense of great promise with AI. I am personally a bit underwhelmed to Andrea's point here of how it's being utilized and understood systematically, not only within HR, but in IT operations, finance, workforce planning, on down the line.
Well, and one thing I always think about too is what makes a good headline. And that's something that I've worn different hats of a researcher that looks at data and looks at findings, and then also somebody that's worked on PR and working with news outlets to get reads. And as many times I'm like, warm story, fuzzy story, let's do this. They're like, nope, chaos. We need chaos. We need like this, things are gonna go bad. And so I think one thing for us to think about too, a lot of what we might read about jobs going away and all of this happening, um, for some organizations, they might be thinking about there and there might be some truth, but I think we need to be really cautious with how we internalize it. Because again, there's a certain thing that medias will convey, and there's certain thing that organizations will really think about internally. And I think for us, like our CEO comes with a tech background and he's very excited about AI and how it can improve things that we're doing. I have never once heard him privately or publicly say, I can't wait to be able to reduce the headcount because of this. Like
Yeah.
never. And I don't believe, and you guys, you both know Vivek. Like if he thought it, he would have said it. Like, and so I do agree with that around that capacity. And Al, in our next catch up, you're gonna have to tell me what you use for that research.
Well,
Because there's
oh
so
no,
much that
no,
we gather.
it was ChatGPT. It was ChatGPT, and
Oh, okay. I know
no,
ChatGPT.
sorry about that. No, just ChatGPT. I just used Bing's search, and it
Oh,
came up,
I love it.
within seconds. And just to highlight a point, one of the things that if AI is going to deliver a benefit, is it going to be realized by the individual and the organization, or the organization? And
Right.
again, I see organizations on this, hey, there's a benefit, it's more efficient, therefore we're going to reduce costs, like that. What would we like, to your point and to Andrea's quote here, that benefit go to the individual? So instead of working 60 hours a week, now they're working 40 hours a week. Now they can get to their kids' recital. Now they can, work out, during the course of the workday, and they can have better well-being. So I would hope that there's that awareness and that courage to act on behalf of the individuals, not just be selfish organizationally about the promise of AI, that promise is also realized to the individual
Yeah.
too.
Oh, I love that. And then I'll add one more thing, and then I'll turn it to Andrea for her advice, is that as much as organizations can do that, I think it's really great for individuals to think about that for themselves. Because if you think about the value you're adding to your own job, like again, vulnerability, but I do a lot of tasks that I'm like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe I'm spending time on this, but they're important. So they're not wasteful tasks. but I'm certainly not using like all my brain and critical thinking, but it's things that need to be done. So how can we also on the individual level think about how can I leverage some of these things so that way in the hours that I have, I can do the work that I know is going to have an even greater impact. It's going to make me more visible, that I'm going to make a bigger difference inside and outside of the organization, because I think it can definitely, I think organizations have a responsibility to do that for the employees. But I think we as individuals can't wait, and we shouldn't wait, because we can find, like exactly like the example you were giving, like we ourselves can find things that can free up our capacity to either do things outside of work or do more meaningful, more impactful things, even in the hours that we've already been spending. All right, Andrea,
Yeah, I
without
love.
further ado, your advice.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm loving this conversation. And I know a lot of what we've talked about because it's very, very top of mind is AI. And I remember when I was thinking about the answer to this question, I was also thinking maybe slightly less about AI, but just a lot of the other external disruptors that are going on, particularly thinking about like the labor market and the economy and really just a lot of uncertainty. I've actually done a lot sort of taking my own advice more recently, which is the more that organizations can better educate their workforce about these external disruptors, I think the better the outcomes will be for everyone and to help navigate what's to come. So it's a little bit of change management, it's a little bit of education and learning and development. But the idea here is that people are crafting their own stories and their own narratives about what they read. And at Sonia, you alluded to this in relative to the last quote is oftentimes what we're reading, what we're being told is not always 100% accurate. And so what happens is people are crafting sort of their own interpretations and explanations around something that's actually routed in a false fact rather than a true fact. And so how can you as organizations get ahead of that a bit more? How do you bring in, for example, experts to discuss what they're seeing, whether it's an economist or whether it's someone who generally understands, for example, labor market or job trends, et cetera. How do we think about, subscribing as an individual, subscribing to more, more reputable publications such as like Harvard Business Review or The Economist. The other thing I would say from an organization standpoint is when you have conversations, whether it's focus groups, maybe it's within teams to really understand like what people believe or what people are hearing, you can also do some work to help dispel myths or, help correct inaccuracies where there can be. And as organizations get ahead of some of that change management or maybe some of the fear and uncertainty across all of these external disruptors. And so mine is really much more broadly, like I said, a bit of education, but also a bit of just better understanding and opportunity to really think about how we collectively rise in the knowledge we're trying to understand about what's going on in the economy.
Yeah, if I can jump in. So in preparation for this, I looked at your quote, Andrea, and I got a chill as you were talking because I am so committed to advocating what you're advocating here, because there is this false narrative, there is this fear, there's this uncertainty, and organizations have a real opportunity, if not a responsibility, to form their own narrative. Hey, we see this happening in the market. This is how we are going to leverage this. This is what we're not going to do. We want you to be part of this journey as opposed to be impacted by it out of the blue. So I would hope it's in partnership, it's an iteration, because this is not going to go away. While AI is a significant disruptor right now, there's disruptions that are going to be happening all the time. And so again, there's huge opportunity there. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Al, I think you're going to bring us home with your own advice.
Yeah, well, I have seen
Oh
over the
no, hold
years.
on.
That's a nice.
Go back. Go back. All right. All right. I got excited.
So, uh, real quick, I've seen many HR leaders and organizations in general have the scarcity mentality around talent, and they say, "Well, why should I invest my people if they're just going to leave or have you?" And I think that's such a horrible mindset to have, particularly in this day and age, particularly if you're in a competitive talent market. If you're investing in your people, there's research that validates the fact that they're going to be more engaged, they're going to be more loyal, they're going to be more empowered to do the things that are required to be more productive, and they're going to have agency beyond what they would otherwise have. So with that in mind, if we create cultures and encourage and enable all workers to learn and adapt quickly, and so embracing this idea that we're in this age of perpetual disruption, and that the very nature of work, given AI's continued evolution, is going to change. So what's thus required? There's ability, the willingness and capacity to learn and adapt. And if we can encourage that and have workers and employees be co-creators of that future, then everyone benefits. So again, that takes not a scarcity mentality, not a, oh, I'm going to hold things back mentality, whether it be budget or learning investments or communication, is that, hey, we're truly going to make you our partners and we're going to co-create the future. So I see some leading practice companies doing that, and I want to do my part in packaging those stories and putting them out. And there's certainly others, like we talked about before, where, okay, AI's here, 10%, the workforce is going out the door. And it's like, I see that scarcity mentality, that kind of, oh, it's all about the short-term, financial gain of AI. I don't see them winning long term. They're going to lose trust. They're not going to have the systems and processes that their competitors or have, those who've invested in the workforce appropriately. So that's where I'm at. I get a little fired up about it, as you can tell.
Well, and the one thing I'll add, because what really stuck to me here was this idea of like scarcity versus abundance. And look, we've all worked for organizations that definitely take more of the approach of the scarcity mentality. And what happens as a result of that is like fight or flight. Ultimately, you think of those like automatic, like biological reactions as humans and we know that those are not oftentimes the healthy reactions or outlets, and they oftentimes lead to sort of knee-jerk or gut things that happen that may not actually end up being, when we think about productivity or engagement or satisfaction in the job. And so I just love this idea of like, how do we shift our mentality? How do we think about our mindsets differently to be more about abundance and less about scarcity? And so that was something that really stuck with me with your advice.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I've been thinking about too is just the nature of I'll go back to my advice about relationships, but just the nature of the relationships of people that work together and how cultures can help strengthen or foster those and what that means in the long term. And so what I mean by that is I feel like some time ago we would think about employment and you leave and it's like basically your moment of death. Like you're no longer involved, there's no more communication, that was your departure, and you'll never be seen or heard from again. And what's been interesting to me is if somebody has a good experience inside the organization, more and more we're seeing that connection continues, maybe in different ways. So I can give even my own anecdotal story of my team and some recent things that have happened is I've had a couple people leave for very positive reasons, fortunately. And people will leave and say, oh, stay in touch. Like we definitely want, like, oh, if you ever need anything, I'll be gay. Okay. But they do. And people will contact me and say, like, I just planned a trip to India. And one of my former colleagues, the day after I planned it, sent me a note to LinkedIn and said, I can't wait to see you. I was like, but how do you know? We don't even work together anymore. You're not in my Slack channel. Um, and even like I was mentioning, Andrea, her and I work together, and that's the reason why we're in each other's lives. Like, probably if we just left it at one class in our PhD, we didn't have enough interaction. And does she work with me? No. Does she do my assignments? No. But some of her help and knowledge that she shared with me were just so infinitely helpful. And so, Al, I couldn't believe when you said that because literally earlier when I was talking about like, oh, what if we train them and they go? And what if I had that in my mind? I think it's Richard Branson. And I was like, oh, like we're starting to read each other's minds, like because we didn't talk about that when we were preparing the webinar, but I think there's this greater good, and also tying in, Andrea, to your recommendation, before that I was saying individuals can also have responsibility and step up, but if organizations do, you can make an impact much more globally and in some ways efficiently, because all of us can go and research something on our own, and we should, because an organization can't teach us everything. But a lot of times I don't know what I don't know, and if somebody takes that interest and shares that, it's going to save me X amount of hours that I'll need to go, and all of my team members and my colleagues individually. So I do think that there is this huge opportunity for organizations to share and really like continue to level up their people, and hopefully they'll stay and continue to be great. And I think even if they don't, just that the brand, the sentiment that stays with them, is something that's oftentimes even hard to quantify. Like we quantify the employee net promoter score, right? How likely are you to recommend someone? And there are huge ties with that. A lot of times, for whatever personal reasons, an organization is no longer a good fit for someone, but it doesn't mean they had a bad experience. It doesn't mean they wouldn't recommend someone else. And all of these things that you two are talking about, I think, are huge reasons, one, for a person to stay, and two, maybe when a person outgrows an organization or opportunity is available for them or just wants to try something differently, they leave the organization with a lot of fondness and either likelihood to return or much higher likelihood to recommend those they respect to the organization as well. With that, we're done with the quotes, and I know we can check with our audience if we have some questions to go through. One thing to kick us off, I'll ask, because I know we played around with maybe doing a specific slide, but I didn't end up adding it, is as our friends, our colleagues are listening to us on this webinar and thinking, okay, like, this is pretty good advice, but gosh, like, what do I do next? Or what could be some obstacles? Or where are my greatest opportunities? What would the final advice of you two, I guess, maybe be in somebody that really wants to implement some of this? Like, what could be potential barriers to it, and what would be some best ways for them to really thinking to potentially anticipate it and in their plan think about this could come up and this is how I would overcome it if it does?
Al, would you like to go first, or would you like me to?
How about you, if you're good to go?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest one that comes to mind in terms of obstacles for me is just, in an economy of uncertainty, which was, one of the things, cost becomes really, people are hesitant, organizations are hesitant to invest and to pull the cost on different things. And that's a very real fear, very real thing that's happening right now. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about, it could be investment worth an investment as part of it. And then there's also a lot of things that don't actually cost anything from an investment standpoint in terms of true dollars. And so what I would say is that if cost feels like a barrier or challenge, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of creativity and how you think about things. And so, for example, I'll go back to my quote because it's the one or my advice because it's the one that's most resonance to me. But like, it doesn't cost an organization anything to have focus groups or bring employees together to understand, like, what is the narrative they believe, what are they hearing, what are the things that sort of feels maybe like myths or things that we need to dispel. And then does it cost anything for an organization or a leader to actually do a little bit of research and understand and learn more about, like, how do I help them understand what's actually happening? Where's the opportunity to dispel myths, et cetera. There's a lot of things that the encouragement is just get creative in how you think about it, because I think almost every single one of the quotes and the things that were talked about in terms of advice, there's a way you can think about it that's actually going to cost zero investment at the end of the day to an organization. And so don't let that be a barrier, even though it feels oftentimes to many of us like a heavy barrier to overcome, which is it's going to cost money and my organization isn't spending right now. So that would be mine.
Andrea, yeah, I love what you shared, and my advice is actually very similar insofar as create space to explore how the future is going to impact your organization and create the future at the team level, at the group level, at the organizational level, whatever you deem appropriate given where your organization is. What I see happening is many organizations are, for lack of a better way to frame it, falling victim to imminent changes. And if they got ahead of it just by creating the space to talk about how it's going to impact them, then they can, again, co-create a future. They can mitigate risks. They can take advantage of opportunities. I just see not enough companies creating this space. And yeah, it can be consultant-led. It can be leader-led. It doesn't take a huge investment, if at all. It just requires, in my view, as a starting point, creating a space to have a structured discussion about, okay, here are the disruptions. Here's how AI is impacting our work. What are we going to do about it? What are your ideas? What are the risks? What are the opportunities again? So I think it could be fun. I think it could be engaging. It can be a trust building exercise, particularly if it's something that's done on an ongoing basis. So I hope to see more of that as we not only go through 2024, but as a norm moving forward.
Mm. Thank you both so much. I know when we first chatted, we thought we can keep this to 30 minutes. Everyone's busy. I've been watching, and actually, everyone's hung on with us even longer. So that's so wonderful. Before we start to wrap up, just to be conscious of time, I'll mute myself. I'll leave everybody's contact information here. And of course, all of you can find us on LinkedIn as well if you want to connect there. And if you ever have any questions. Before we sign off, Andrea, Al, I know you gave a lot of advice and a lot of opinions in these 45 minutes. Just wanted to give you an opportunity if you have any last thoughts, words, advice that you want to share with our guests before we sign off.
I would just say first, thank you. Thanks for taking some time, Sonia. Thanks for the opportunity to connect and share some advice. And I'll go back to Sonia, the advice that you started with, which is, please reach out, please connect. We're all in various ways kind of going through some of the similar challenges. And I think that the more that we can share what others are doing, what other organizations are doing, what we're trying to do, the challenges we have collectively, the better we're going to be, both for our organizations, but just also to continue to combat all of these external disruptors that are going to keep coming, even ones we haven't thought of or don't know of yet. So that would be my kind of closing remarks. Al?
Well, Andrea, Sanya, thank you for sharing. Thank you for having me. All those who've joined today, thank you for sharing your time. And I'll say, if I can ever be of help, reach out to me on LinkedIn. It is a pleasure to collaborate with Sanya and Andrea. And it's something that this discussion is not going to go away. The ideas they're going to evolve. So I don't pretend, nor does anybody know we have the answers, but at this stage of my life and career, I believe we have some questions and ideas that we can put forth that will hopefully be helpful. Hopefully today was helpful. But yeah, I think as we enter in the future, there's going to be more courage and creativity required of all of us. So, and to Andrea's point, we can do that more easy and more effectively and joyfully together than we can in isolation. So again, thank you all.
And thank you both so much for your time, for everything that you shared today. It's always such a pleasure to catch up with you, to talk with you. And I love this format that more people can join us. And thank you, all of you that took the time to join us, to listen in. Like Alan Andre was saying, please feel free to connect there. I think there are a lot of beautiful things ahead. There's some, of course, things that will maybe be challenging, but I think the more we continue to share, the more we continue to spend time together and really help each other get the best out of it, the better off we'll be and the more opportunities there will be. So thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Al, again. And thank you for all of our guests. And we'll see you all again soon and have a wonderful 2024.